So for my listeners that might not know, give a brief synopsis of the purples. Or excuse me,
So yeah, if your listeners have never heard of me, I'm Human Vibration. I have the Twitter account where I just basically share thoughts, ideas. It started with a pretty specific thought and idea. I had this idea in January of this year of 2020. I'm sorry, January of last year, so a year ago. That this case, my favorite case in the whole world. I love this conspiracy or just unsolved mystery of JonBene Ramsey. The case was just endlessly fascinating to me. I had followed it for a decade long. I mean, it's been 25 years since it happened, but ever since I was old enough to like search on the computer, I remember looking up information about JonBene Ramsey and trying to figure out who did it. And it was like all the rabbit holes were so incredibly fascinating and just such a bizarre story. And I thought that like one day someone's going to figure it out. Like someone's really going to get to the bottom of this. I truly believed it, but I thought it was going to be like finding the who murdered JonBene. And so I had this crazy revelation concurrently with looking into technology that relates to kind of simulated identities, something that we're experiencing right now, seeing deep fake technology, and we're seeing like people on screen that just look kind of digital, and some really weird anomalies happening and kind of glitches happening. But about a year ago, I was really getting into the learning of this, and something snapped in my head where I looked at the case again. I looked at JonBene, and her face just looked digital to me. It just struck me very, very like a ton of bricks. I had that feeling, the uncanny valley feeling, which is one of our base human responses. It's built into every one of us. We all can experience this sensation, and it's when we are confronted with a visual of something that is purported to be a human, something that looks like a human, like a humanoid, a human-like thing, whether it's a cartoon that looks really human-like or like a robot, but it's too human-like, but not quite there. It makes us have this dropping stone in our stomach. We have a visceral reaction. We can't control it. We feel it. We feel a gut reaction, and we don't get that if it's like a cartoony looking robot, or like it's like you can tell it's like a it's like a cartoon looking. I don't know. There's this range. There's this range where if it doesn't look that human, then we're good, we're fine. But if it starts looking too human, but not quite human, we just get super freaked out. And I had that feeling when I looked at her face. I saw a digitally created face. I did not see I didn't see real eyes. I didn't see a real face. I saw a computer generated face, and it related 100% to this website I had been on. thispersondoesnotexist.com, which I really recommend everyone in your listening audience. Like, if you have no idea, if you're already like, what the hell is she talking about? I would recommend just whenever you can, go to thispersondoesnotexist.com and just press refresh for about a minute. And that's all it takes. And understand that every face looking back at you, even though they look like someone that you would see on Facebook or Instagram as their profile photo, even though they look like humans, they're not. They're digitally generated faces. They have never existed in reality. They may look real, but they are not real. And soon, once you kind of have that in your brain, once you tell yourself, I know this looks real, but it's not real, you will begin to see the next layer, and you will begin to see some anomalies in these photographs, and you'll begin to see that these faces really don't look real, but your brain was doing some sort of automatic process for the first 30 seconds or so, kind of fixing it for you. It was telling you like, no, these are faces, so we're gonna just go ahead and fix that weird ear, and we're gonna go ahead and like fix that like orb that's floating in the background. And your brain actually like X's out and does this like almost a peripheral like exiting of things that do not fit within what we're expecting to see. Our brain does this really complicated process where it fixes things. Kind of like if you look at a face upside down, but like the mouth is rotated, like your brain will do this thing where it automatically rotates it again. And then when you flip it up, then you see that the mouth is not in the right position. But if you have it upside down, you can't see that. It's really strange. So there's lots of little things that our brain does without us realizing in these optical illusions. And so when you're looking at these faces, you will begin to see that they're fake looking. Okay, so I had done that. I had become primed to this just automatic response of like, okay, I can see this face is not real. And I looked at her face like a couple of days later, and that was the response that I had. I was like, am I on this website again? You know, what's happening? And then then the rest just really started unfolding. I already had an encyclopedic knowledge of the case. I already had a lot of information about the case itself from just news reports and being interested in the case from a standpoint of, I thought she, like a little girl who got murdered. I was fascinated by the case. And then I started like putting things together that I already knew. I knew that the dad had this successful like graphics company, this company called Access Graphics. It was a computer reseller company. And I started looking deeper and deeper into it. And I knew that it was already connected to like Lockheed Martin, which was a humongous government contractor. They do, you know, weapons grade machinery and software systems and all sorts of really complex, highly expensive projects for the government here and beyond. And his company was mixed up in that somehow. And so I started looking into it, and well, turns out like the company, what were they doing at the time? Well, the company that dad was part of, they were doing these like really complicated 3D graphics rendering systems. That's what these machines were doing. And when we're thinking about, you know, the fabrication of identities, like this is the exact software and hardware systems that one would need in order to do this. And it was all under the guise of providing graphics for the computer gaming industry, like Sega games. And you know, at the time they were getting in 3D. They looked really cartoonish, but they were getting into the 3D realm. And remember, whenever we see like versions of technology, it's such a diluted, downgraded version of what actually exists. And so if like they're showing us like this cartoony 3D experience within, you know, the gaming systems, what actually exists is probably, you know, extremely lifelike, and we're just not going to see that for another couple of decades. And when we look at the gaming systems now, you know, you think about like these sports gaming systems. Sometimes when I'm watching professional sports on TV, it will appear video game like, because the video game graphics are so good. But you know, you see these commercials for these. I'm not a gamer. When I was a kid, I did a lot of gaming, but not a gamer as an adult. But when I see these representations of these games and graphics, I'm just like, we're seeing it now. We're seeing how, you know, they even have like the skin mapped where you can see like the perspiration coming out of these players' skin, and you know, the almost like the marble curvature, marble carvings where you can see the veining. You know, we're beginning to see that in the 3D world. And that's an interesting connection, because when you look at a step in the process of 3D rendering, before you put the skin on, before you put the hair on, before you put the eyes in, there's this version of the 3D person that looks like a marble statue. It's almost it looks like a one-to-one. It looks like a template and then you begin coloring it. But it's interesting that a version of the 3D process just absolutely manifests a separate version of art that we hold somehow, you know, in such high regard, and we still can't explain, like, how did they do that? We still can't really explain it. So sometimes I wonder how those types of art were achieved. Okay, so 3D identity, JonBene Ramsey, and I apologize, I talk about this case all the time. I can't remember where things start and where things end with her sometimes. So just once I kind of figured out that this could be something like the technology, this could be something like she could be. I'm seeing a fake girl. It seems like she's in this world of like fake, like this identity creation with these real-time 3D graphics capabilities on these complicated graphic systems. Like that's kind of what her family was a part of. You know, I was like, well, what else is in this world? And her imagery was a huge part of it, and her pageantry was a huge part of it. And you know, one thing that I began to discover was a lot of the pieces of the case, once you look into them, they start to fall apart. One thing was the pageants. I began to look into the pageants, and the pageants didn't seem to exist outside of JonBene, outside of the world of JonBene. And that was just absolutely fascinating to me, because I would do these targeted searches looking for these specific pageants. And without JonBene supporting the search, without some sort of like inference of JonBene Ramsey, there was just no hits of some of these pageants. They just did not exist outside of her, which I thought was interesting. I thought that was telling and very interesting. And then I started finding all these anomalies with her family, with her parents. They went on Larry King Live a few years after, and they said all these really strange things. They said that they had never received her death certificate. They had never received a copy of the death certificate of her daughter. And that struck me as incredibly strange and off base, because to do really anything, you know, to bury a child, they actually moved the body after the story was she was buried in Georgia, but you know, she died in Colorado. That's where this case went down. And so in order to move a body, you have to have a death certificate. In order to bury a body, especially out of state, you have to have a death certificate. She was buried in a real cemetery. She was a real grave. But they never received a copy of the death certificate, or, you know, that seems very interesting. And like both the parents confirmed that, and there was very specific wording on that. And another thing that I noted, that I found based on these news articles that were coming out from the local papers, one of the things that was reported was that the record of her body, and coming into the morgue at the Boulder County morgue, the record of her body had mysteriously gone missing. The logbook pages that recorded the arrival of the body of JonBene, they no longer existed because someone had come in and stolen them. And so you couldn't like see and verify that she'd ever come in, because they didn't have computer logs at the time. They just had this very, you know, analog system, this kind of sleepy small town. I think it's important to say there had never been a murder. This was like the first murder in Boulder, Colorado. Boulder was not a thriving community. Boulder was a very sleepy, it was a college town, a commuter town. It had some government, there was an Air Force base not too far away. And it was like a very sleepy Twin Peaks style town, where like the if you are familiar with that show, it's basically a murder in a murder of a, you know, dead girl in a town, and the cops have no idea what to do. They've never experienced anything like this, and they're just totally in over their heads. And like that, the Boulder, Colorado policemen had no idea what was going on, and they messed up the case. But I think that they had no idea that there was a deception being pulled on them concurrently, and they were just trying to do their jobs as in over their heads as they were. I think that they missed out on like the basic deception. And also, her body was never seen at the crime scene. Her body was never seen. It was always under a white blanket, under a white bed sheet, always. And that's something that's reported in every news report. The father like found the body in the basement, brought it upstairs. It was under a white sheet when he found it. It was under a white sheet when he brought it up. He put it under the Christmas tree. Strangely, he put the body under the Christmas tree. It was still under the white blanket. The mom like falls on it. And like all the cops are like, what the fuck do we do? They have no idea how to react to this. And then the morgue comes and picks up the body still under the sheet, and they take it away, and then that's that. And then the rest is this discovery process. And what I have found in this case is that every reported element of this case is just steeped in weird deception and symbology, and just extraordinarily dark inferences, but with no proof behind it. And like the speculation around this case is just extraordinarily gross and horrific and traumatic. And what happened to this little girl is just endlessly dark. And I think that I recommend also looking at the thread, because I started it out with what I think is the most important element of the case, which is this concept of loosh. It's this concept of our energy, our collective energy, our human energy, our shared experience here, our emotional energy, our physical energy, our psychological kinetic energy, the sum total of that together as humanity. It can be positive, and it can be uplifting, and it can be something that fills us and sustains us and fulfills us, or it can be extraordinarily negative, and it can like take us all down with it. And I think that the cases like this, cases that are unending and extraordinarily traumatic and seemingly unsolvable. This case isn't just, I say this a lot, but this case isn't just unsolved. It is unsolvable. And I think it's unsolvable by design. I think it was made to be unsolvable because at the end, at the root, is just deception. It's just this fabricated. I think that there was no victim. I think that it's an entire fabrication. And everything we see of JonBene is a result of this exact technology that they were developing at the time, this ability to create these extraordinarily illustrious personalities, kind of like Snapchat filters, but instead of an overlay of like, you know, a pumpkin head or like puppy dog ears or something, you know, that kind of follows you in real time, that we can see that today. And we even have deepfake technology in our phones. So, I mean, we know that this exists, but from what I am able to infer and understand about this case is this is exactly what we were seeing with JonBene Ramsey. All the photos that we saw were digital manufacturing of a computer generated identity that was fed inputs and created. It was created. Everything about her. I mean, she looks like Marilyn Monroe. She kind of looks like the mom, kind of looks like the dad. She kind of looks like a little boy a lot. And, you know, people say that a lot. Well, she was a little boy. And it's like, well, I think that she was made to look like that too. I think a lot of her was made to look like a kid, but also an adult. She was made to look like a girl, but also a boy. Like, I think that there's a lot of juxtaposition and polarization within the development of her identity. And then, so, you know, so what's the point? Well, we can see that this case is still around. We can see that like there's still new news about this case. Like there's still new documentaries. There's still new 60-minute reports, new like 2020s about what's going on with the JonBene Ramsey case. And it's still the same old story. It's still speculation on the family. It's still speculation on the brother. Everyone's just kind of hinting around. It's still speculation on town pedophiles. All of these paths that have been gone down and dusted up, they just lead nowhere, and it just continues to, and then it'll die away, and then it'll come back up and cycle around, and then it'll die away, but it'll never be solved. And it's just like an open wound. It's like a never-ending kind of like abscess on society, this emotional open wound. And there's a lot of cases like this. I think like the Madeleine McCann case in the UK is something that a lot of people point to, of that being a similar, she was, you know, of this little girl that went missing and still can't figure out what's going on. Still nobody really arrested in that case. Still just endless questions, way more questions than answers, no answers at all really. And that's like the JonBene Ramsey case. And so back to the idea of loosh. So there's these certain cases and there's these certain experiences that we all share, and they seem to like saturate our consciousness. And these news stories are part of it. And I think the JonBene Ramsey case was just developed to be the maximum extraction of our psychic energy, of our, like, to arrest our attention. And it did. Like, we were fascinated by this case. It was on the cover of every like magazine. Especially at the time in the 90s. This happened in 1996. And it's a really fascinating case. I'm sure people are aging out of it. People are like, you know, they weren't aware of it. Especially if they're, you know, like a decade younger than I am. But I think that it's still like a case study in things that won't go away. You know, these stories that just won't go away, and these news stories that they almost like bring out just to relive certain traumatic, they know that they're like little spark plugs. Like they know that if they just plug this story in, that we'll get like this jolt of energetic, we'll be fascinated again, we'll think about it again, we'll kind of talk about all the gross stuff again, about the really like deep dark rabbit holes, we'll speculate on it again, but we'll never have a resolution on it. And I just think that's the point. And when I found all these touch points of the case to kind of fall apart, it just kept reinforcing that there was something much deeper to the deception of like the case of JonBene, or than what we were looking at through the existing rabbit holes. And I came to the personal understanding that it was because she just didn't exist, that nothing could ever be solved about her murder because she wasn't murdered. And that was in January of 2020. And that was kind of that was my waking up moment, when I had this, like all these things started to click together, all these understandings that I had over like my lifetime. I work in graphic design and video production, and so I had like an inner working knowledge of like just this type of production value, and even the green screen technology, and a little bit of the 3D rendering capabilities, and just the base language of these things, and the way, and color theory, and the way that colors interact, especially digital versus print. That's something I was very aware of and very understanding of, and Pantone colors and CMYK, RGB, just the way that color and light exists and works in the design world, the digital world, and the computer-based world. All that was kind of like on one side, and then I was learning about this. I was like concurrently having these experiences where I was understanding just a broader deception. Like I knew that we weren't getting the full story on lots of stuff. I knew that there was something deeper with 9/11. I knew that there was something deeper with the John F. Kennedy assassination. I didn't know what. You know, I certainly was looking under every conspiracy theory rock I could find. I didn't know which was going to be the right one, but I knew we weren't getting like the true story. I just knew it. I felt it in my bones. Like the full story, the official story is not the true story. And I think a lot of people feel that. And I think that's why conspiracy theories are just so emotionally juicy, because we just get it. We get that we get that we're being deceived. We just don't really know how, and we want to find out. And so we'll try to find out. And the conspiracy theory world, it does a lot to try to provide some answers. But I also think, like, many times, a lot of the world of conspiracies is just like getting you closer and closer to the darkness, because it's basically saying like, oh, you know, it's the big bad government. At the end of every conspiracy theory, it's because like, oh, it's the shadowy government. Oh, you know, they're so big and so, you know, the government just can do anything, and the government assassinated this person, and the government did that, and like, oh, it's the secret government and the secret government, and it's like, where does this end? You know, and so conspiracy theories, I think that if any conspiracy theories is trying to convince you that the government is like super duper powerful, then I think that you might be time to like second guess that conspiracy theory. Because something else that I've concurrently been understanding is like the best tool that the quote unquote powers that be have is deception, is like manipulation of information and manipulation of light and manipulation of how we take in these stories, and how we take in reality as we know it through our screens. You know, we experience our world through our screens. As much as we live in the real world, as much as we interact inside the real world and walk, you know, here and there, and go inside real buildings and experience real things, there is a sub-level of reality that we are experiencing just as tangibly, just as fruitfully, just as powerfully, and that is the world through our digital screens, through our devices, through the universe we keep in our pocket at all times. And I think that through our screens, you know, we think about what is a screen. A screen, we know, is like a fence. A screen is a method of concealment when you think about what a screen also is. And so we're looking through our screens, we're looking at through these methods of concealment, these dividers, these barriers, and we are receiving we're receiving light information. We're receiving false light. It's coming from it's not a natural biological light, or what we understand is like true light.
A screen can also be a filter, like a filtering of information.
Exactly. And so we're getting false light through a filter, through a fence, and we don't know what it's screening out. We don't know what it's projecting towards us. We don't know what we're actually getting, but we know what we're getting is not a true representation of reality. Even if it is a one-to-one of reality, it's still coming through a screen, and it's still digitally represented. It's not necessarily the same as looking directly out in front of you and seeing the quote-unquote real world in front of you. What we are experiencing through our screens is inherently manipulated. It's inherently transposed into false light, and we're taking, you know, the sunlit experience of the real world, and we're transposing that through these crystallized diodes, these RG, red, green, and blue diodes in our pockets, and they have thousands and, you know, millions and millions of diodes within your screen, of these LED projections onto you. If you really just like zoomed in inside your phone, you'd see that there is no picture at all. There's just these little lights. There's just these little tri-lights, these like little clusters of red, green, and blue, just millions of them. And together they work together and they project this image that looks it could look like a puppy dog, it could look like the sky, it could look like a beautiful photograph of anything, like work of art, it can be anything. But if you zoom in, they haven't changed, they're still the same. It's just these little, like 3 little things. And you think about that, you think about how our entire understanding of reality is controlled by just these 3 little colors working together, red, green, and blue. And together those can create anything. And if there's enough of them, it'll trick the eye to thinking that it's like a whole thing. But because when we look at a phone, we don't see a million red, greens, and blues together. We just see the image that we see, and we never think twice. But what it is just like, they're just kind of firing in different levels, all the little clusters. And so one thing that I really focus on with my Twitter account and with Human Vibration is the world through our screens. I think that something that we're experiencing now more than ever is manipulated experiences through our screens. We're seeing these strange anomalies with events that are seemingly taking place and seemingly occurring through our screens. But when we actually try to observe that thing in our own world, it's not replicated. Like, we're seeing a version of reality through our screens that is, you know, even with a lot of the social issues that are happening, you know, we're seeing this really extraordinarily divided, you know, cutthroat world, this extraordinarily polarized human experience. But together, I don't think we're going through that as a people together. I think that we're seeing that through our screens, but I don't necessarily think that the human experience is as bad as they're creating it to be.